Welcome back. We are joined here today by Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine, intelligence analyst, and UN weapons inspector. So thank you very much for coming on. We see now that the United States has released this new national security strategy, which has seemingly taken most by surprise, especially the Europeans. However, you more or less predicted that the US was going to go this direction about 8 months ago. How do you make sense of this new security strategy?
Well, I mean, this is exactly what Donald Trump said he was going to do. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to go back and listen to Donald Trump. Um, Listen to him during the campaign, listen to him as he spoke about what his priorities were. You're right. Back in April, I spoke to this issue and I said that the number one priority of the United States will be Fortress America to secure the Western Hemisphere for America. I said the next most important front would be China, to shift, resources that weren't going to be allocated to security of the Western Hemisphere to the Pacific to stand up to China there. That the United States would de-emphasize its military engagement in both Europe and the Middle East. This wasn't me, making things up out of thin air. This is simply assessing the statements made by the Trump administration. And, you know, we are now, gosh, what, 10 months into the Trump presidency. There are certain patterns that are appearing because, look, you're analytically inclined. I know you are. I follow you. I listen to you. Um, and if you're analytically inclined, the Trump administration has to be one of the most singularly frustrating entities to follow and evaluate because if you do short-term plotting, they're all over the map. I mean, one day they say this, the next day they say something else, they say it again, they say it again, and it's very frustrating. But when you examine these data points over time, you find that they inexorably point in the direction that Trump says he wants to go. It's just that he's not going from A to to Z directly. He is going all over the map, and um, it's difficult. But if you assess Trump over the long term, everything he said he wanted to accomplish, the directions he wanted to go, that's the direction he's heading. And the national security strategy document is reflective of this reality. Um, Also, keep in mind that, he tasked his national security team with the production of this document back in April. So, the guidance that was given for the production of this document remained consistent, and therefore there's no surprises that this document says what it does.
Well, I'm thinking if you switch from you recognize that the world has switched from unipolarity to multipolarity and you have to prioritize places, it does make a lot of sense. That is, first priority is, well, shore up your own hemisphere, that is, the Western Hemisphere. Then, of course, confront the main adversary, which is in Asia, China primarily. And if you pivot to those places, you pivot away. So that's Europe, which is getting the, well, I guess, short end of the stick. So a lot of this makes sense, but there's a lot of focus on ideology as well, though. How do you make sense of this? Or they call for reducing the role of ideology, to be more specific.
When you take a look at, again, evaluating the Trump administration over time, um, go back to the last national security strategy document that was promulgated by the Biden administration. In it, they build a world vision that is predicated on the defense of the rules-based international order. That's was the sacred mantra of everything American. And from that came the defense of democracy, American democracy imposed on other nations as the gold standard. Um, Donald Trump gave a number of very telling speeches during his campaign in which he rejected the rules-based international order and he rejected the notion that America has a right to dictate things, outcomes to other nations based upon, American principles, values, etc. Um, He said the place for American values is at home. That's where we need to defend them, at home. Um, and if we shouldn't be projecting them out of our shores if we haven't fully defended them at home, that's a little bit hypocritical. Remember one of the answers about to a question he gave, Putin is a killer. He said, "Well, we've killed a lot of people too." You know, very pragmatic, realistic answer. I would say that it shouldn't take anybody by surprise that you know uh, Trump, when evaluating the world we live in, is more interested in the practicalities, um, economic relations, who we invest our money in, why are we investing money to places, and there's a difference between telling people what you have to do, which Trump says that's not our role, and giving people money. Trump's like, I'm going to give you money if you align with us, if you're on our side, if you're doing what we want, if you do what we believe in, then you can get money. When it comes to Europe right now, I mean, let's just look at, again, a simplistic analogy, but we'll use it nonetheless, or a simplistic, mechanism of explanation. NATO claims to be all about America. I mean, my God, the Secretary General of NATO can't he just falls over himself to praise America and the role that America plays, the leadership role, especially when we tell NATO how much money they have to spend. That we must spend this money because Daddy told us to. Okay, that's one way. Now, then there's the European Union, which is as anti-American as the day is long. Let's just be honest about it. I can dig through all European Union statements. They are anti-American. They're fundamentally anti-American. And it's not just the fact that they're posturing themselves as a global competitor to the United States. They don't like us. They simply don't like us. They belittle us. I read their stuff. I'm not, this to be true. Go into the web pages of any one of these European parliamentarians that fly the blue flag and the gold stars and posture themselves as to be the moral equivalent or superior of the United States of America. They hate the United States of America and they despise Americans. We're only useful when we do what they want us to do, but they don't like it. Look, some of the times they don't like it for cause. I mean, you know, America's a war power and a warmongering nation. Yep, guilty as charged. But then don't pretend to be our friend when you put on your NATO hat. Because the same people that condemn us when they wear their EU hat are the same people that are embracing us when they wear their NATO hat. This is a fundamental inconsistency that the Trump administration's fed up with. And the other thing is when we sit down with Europe and try and say, who do we want to align ourselves with? We don't want to align ourselves with people who, A, denigrate us. If you don't like America, guess what? We don't like you either. So, we shall go our own ways. But, the other thing is, if you act in a way that is against core American values, then don't expect us to embrace you either. And freedom of speech is a core American value. And it certainly isn't being practiced in Europe today in many locations. Interference in elections. I mean, you guys, Europeans, wake up. This is Donald Trump. Okay, he believes fervently that the election was stolen from him in 2020. He knows, and this is an absolute, that the Democrats sought to undermine his 2016 candidacy. All right, so now you're running around playing stupid games in Romania, Moldova. You're seeking to outlaw a political party in Germany, and you want the United States, you want this president to be silent? No, you're anti-American by definition. And this is the national security strategy of the United States that seeks to promote American security interests. So don't be surprised that we've turned against Europe. And this is a fundamental turn. This isn't, a little lover's spat. This isn't a quarrel that will be papered over. This is of a fundamental nature. Europe is on a pathway, according to the Trump administration, to civilizational erasure. That means you're gone. You're doing it to yourself. We have decided that we will try to get those European nations, not the European Union, not the European community, those European nations that are worth saving on the right trajectory. But NATO is finished. I hope people understand that too, because the Trump administration has said There are members of NATO today who don't reflect the cultural values and realities of the nations that signed the charter. And therefore, they are incompatible with what we believe should be defended under the charter. It's over, finished, done, goodbye.
Yeah, it is interesting though how well, not just the EU, but the Europeans often view Americans, because it's in very much human nature to always divide, who are we and who are them, the in-group and the out-group. And whenever we talk about us Europeans, then the Americans, there's often this very derogatory language, like you said, hostile in many ways. But as soon as there's you introduce the Russians, then the Americans are suddenly part of us, and then they're celebrated. But as when it's only the two of us, then there's a very strange, yeah,
Yeah, can I just remind you, European
distaste.
audience, who we are? We liberated you, son of a bitches.
No,
Okay, we liberated you. Russia did too. Russia liberated the East. We liberated the West. We rebuilt your sorry asses. You wouldn't be here today if it weren't for us. We're not perfect. We never claimed to be perfect. We're Americans. But my God, we went across the ocean to save your sorry asses. And we buried 100,000 plus Americans doing so. And I also want to remind the Germans of a harsh reality too. Familiarize yourselves with Article 53 of the United Nations Charter. Not too many people know what it is, but it's the article that speaks of enemy states. And it gives every nation in the world the right to pound your ass into the dirt if you seek to re-embrace aggressive policies that should have been erased from your DNA at the end of the Second World War. Germany today, in speaking about getting the largest army and preparing for war with Russia, these are aggressive policies. And I don't think the Russians have forgotten what Article 53 is. And hey, guys, J.D. Vance and company, they're looking at it too. You're the enemy of America. Literally, you are defined by the United Nations Charter as an enemy state. And when you seek to promulgate aggressive policies, don't be surprised when those who buried their fathers, uncles, sons in the soil of Europe to save your sorry asses suddenly decide maybe it's time to bury you instead. This is fundamental, guys. Europe better wake the hell up, because America's waking up. We're sick and tired of sending money your way, of saving your asses, only to have you sit there and spit in our face. Look, there's ways to criticize America. We deserve to be criticized. We are not perfect. We have done a lot of things wrong. And I have no problem with people holding us to account. But when you owe your very existence to the blood of Americans, you better bite your tongue when you start to say certain things, or don't be surprised when we turn around and hold you to account. And that's what's happening today. You're being held to account by a generation of Americans who are tired of playing the game. We're not going to underwrite your security with a blank check anymore. And we're not going to stand by idly while you plot against us.
there's an interesting comparison though, because with the Russians, they often commented on this dishonesty too. That is, when the Europeans go to Moscow, they talk about their security, their aspiration, and they kind of show some understanding. Yeah, no, we can work together. And then when they come back to Brussels, the language has changed completely, and it's a little bit like with Trump, I guess. When they meet him, it's, oh, thank you, Daddy, for convincing us to spend more on the military. But then, of course, when they're back in Brussels, they don't hide the contempt for him. So it's very fake, the way they approach it.
Disingenuous.
Yeah. But it's an interesting aspect of this, because I think you make a great point that this should have been predictable, that Trump would have, I guess, identified himself close with the Le Pens and the AfD and the Romania, Moldova, all the essentially opposition, which has been sidelined, given that he saw this is what happened to him. But there's a comment though within the national security strategy that the intention to cultivate resistance to this downward trajectory of Europe. How do you interpret this? Do you think there's going to be more efforts to actively challenge the authority of people like Merz and Macron and Starmer and the likes?
I think yeah, it's over for Merz. Again, I just want to remind the German people who follow you that Merz is the leader of an enemy state. Okay, this is a reality. You don't get to rebuild your military, not with your history. So Merz is history. He's finished, and the efforts among the Germans to suppress the democratic, um, free will in Germany is not going unnoticed as well. AFD, whatever you think about AFD, um, you know, an increasingly large number of Germans think that that's the direction they want to go. Um, and we'll see what happens. I can't predict the future, but I would imagine that a Germany where if you look at the demographic division of support, AFD is very popular in the former Eastern, um, sectors of Germany. Maybe Germany doesn't deserve to be a unified state. Maybe the future of Germany is to be a divided state. Um, and that might be the direction the United States starts pushing. Again, Germany, beware, you're the enemy. We're not going to allow you to suppress democracy, suppress free speech, and exist as a unified whole that is seeking to, head back down the path of the Third Reich, it isn't going to be permitted. And if you want to do this, remember, we are looking to the Russians now, according to national security strategy, as partners in stability. Not friends. We're not best friends. I mean, I personally believe that we could be and we should be, but Trump's not there yet. Trump is talking. They didn't talk about Russia as an adversary or an enemy. Russia was a partner of stability. And therefore, anything that seeks to undermine this strategic decision to have a stable relationship with Russia becomes the enemy. In Germany, you're now the enemy. You're the official enemy of the United States. Get used to it. France, the same thing. I mean, Macron actively conspiring against the United States right now. Starmer, the same thing. I mean, there was a rumor going out that they're talking about divesting themselves of American treasuries. Uh, Play the game. Really. I mean, there's the old fool around and then you will find out. We will crush you. We will destroy you. That will be the end of Europe. If you want to play this game, we will do it because there's no love lost here. We don't like you anymore. I mean, we always came to point to go to France and tour Paris. We thought it was cool to go to Germany and drink beer. And both in Germany, we used to have American soldiers living there. They fell in love with German women. They brought them home. We have, families of children that come from American German, relationships. The same thing in England. We have a long storied history with the British, but we also kicked the English out of America back in the day, and we don't believe in the king. We're not going to tolerate any nonsense from Europe. That's just the way it's going to be. So yeah, I think you're going to see a very active role of the United States going forward in promoting those political elements in Europe that align with our ideals and our values, and working actively against those who conspire against us. And so, yeah, if you're Starmer, if you're Macron, if you're Merz, be on notice. You're our enemy now because you made yourself our enemy.
I think back in February, when at the Munich Security Conference, then when J.D. Vance made this speech, I think many Europeans were caught a bit off guard and thought that it was just J.D. Vance was, blowing off some steam. I don't think they saw the deep foundations in this, in terms of how this rift is growing between the U.S. and Europe. But besides threatening to deinvest from the U.S., we had now the former EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, who argued that, why are we still pretending America's a friend? Trump is our enemy. This train has now left the station, it seems. How do you well, you mentioned before that NATO is done, but how do you see this like in the short and medium term? Well, not short, but medium term already, because this rhetoric is becoming quite mutually aggressive. And also, I saw this news article headline in I forgot which one, a British newspaper, that the Europeans are, they're walking a tightrope because they want to be friendly to Trump, but they still want to, they say help Ukraine, which means to prolong the war and undermine Trump's peace agreement by convincing Zelensky not to take it. But But so in other words, they want to tell Daddy how great he is. At the same time, they're trying to sabotage what he's doing. I mean, this how long can this go on before Trump responds? Do you think? Do you see some escalation coming this way?
Yeah, I see that. You know, this can spin out of control very fast, very fast. What I see happening is that Trump is going to use the tools of divide and conquer. There are certain European nations that can't live without the United States. Poland. Poland is not going to walk away from the United States. Germany has already made a strategic decision to walk away. So in the short term, I think you're going to see the transfer of American assets out of Germany into Poland or back to the United States. But I think you're going to see the United States divest itself of Germany. This is fundamental. It's the end of NATO. The United States is already, if you notice that Marco Rubio didn't attend the NATO ministerial, it's the kiss of death. The other thing that's happening is that we are beginning to pull out of some of the foundational, you know, infrastructure of NATO, logistical planning, communications. NATO can't have a large scale military exercise without the United States involvement. We're not going to be involved. We're going to start to withdraw a whole bunch of critical support to NATO while we still be in NATO. We're just going to tell the Europeans, you gotta do it. And Europe can't do it. Europe doesn't have logistical infrastructure that can unify Europe. They don't have a communications framework that can unify Europe. They were relying on the United States for this forever. And so then as Europe starts to collapse, the expense of sustaining NATO without the United States becomes prohibitive. And nations are going to opt out, especially when the United States offers them bilateral security arrangements. And this is what's going to be the end of NATO when the United States moves away from collective security. And we already have. Scott Bessent made it clear that if Russia attacks NATO, we're not going to come screaming in with troops. We'll be willing to sell you some equipment. Maybe. That's it. Of course, that's all that's required under Article 5. People haven't read it very closely if they think that it automatically requires us to send troops in. But we're done with that. So we are getting to a situation where if a European nation behaves irresponsibly and provokes Russia and Russia attacks it, that there isn't going to be a collective response by NATO because NATO can't collectively respond without the United States. And we're opting out of that. We view Europe as an irresponsible entity right now. So I think you're going to see us making individual bilateral security deals with individual European states and opting out of security arrangements with others. And that's the end of collective defense, which that means the end of NATO. And this can happen as soon as this summer. So, yeah, I mean, again, be careful what you ask for, Europe, because you may very well get it. And in the case of America walking away from you, it's already happened. It's done.
Well, some good developments could come from this, though, because one of the problems often recognized, at least by many academics in the 90s, was all these countries, the Baltic states, for example, when you're a small country bordering massive Russia, you would have a systemic incentive to seek some reconciliation. However, with the US and NATO behind them, they instead could take the luxury of pursuing some historical vengeance or, well, essentially a country like Estonia with 1.5 million. To have such a hostile policy towards Russia, it doesn't really make much sense. It's very suicidal. And, instead of calming them down, we handed over the car keys to them by making Kallas the EU foreign policy chief, which is an extraordinary thing to do. But no, so there might be some, if the US is more ambiguous about the extent to which it would help Europe, perhaps it could tone down some of the more radical element, and maybe some of the Europeans would rediscover diplomacy. But if you were sitting in Moscow, though, and you're now opening this document of the US new national security strategy, how would you make sense of this? Or what would it mean for